James Whitmore trusted numbers more than he trusted people. Numbers did not lie about their intentions. Numbers did not smile at you and then walk away. A number was what it was, and if you measured it twice, it stayed the same both times. The sun had not fully cleared the ridge above Hollis Creek Valley when James walked his rows of lettuce, checking the soil moisture meter at each marker stake. He wrote the readings in a small notebook, the same careful way he wrote down every number that mattered to him, neat columns, dates in a margin, nothing left to memory. 12% here, 14% there. The numbers told him what the day needed. They never asked him questions he did not want to answer. James was tall and rangy, his frame shaped by 2 years of steady outdoor labor into something leaner and more sun-worn than it might have been in another life. His hair, dark brown once, had started going gray at the temples, cut short in the plain, practical way of someone who did not want to think about it. His eyes were a pale, flat gray, the color of an overcast sky before rain, and they rarely settled on another person's face for more than a few seconds at a time. A permanent line sat between his eyebrows, the kind carved by years of concentrating hard on something exacting, now put to use squinting at storm clouds instead. His jaw was strong and often tight, as if braced for something, even on mornings when nothing at all was wrong. Walt Higgins, a broad, sun-creased man in his 70s with a face like a well-used baseball glove and a permanent, easy squint, leaned over the fence that separated their 2 plots of rented farmland. "Morning, James," Walt said. "Coffee's on if you want some." "I'm fine," James said. He did not look up from his notebook. Walt had said the same thing every morning for almost 2 years, and James had said no almost every time. It was not that Walt seemed dangerous. It was that kindness, in James's experience, usually came with a bill attached. He had learned that lesson the hard way, and he did not plan to learn it twice. He kept his shoulders angled slightly away from the fence, the way a man stands when he wants to be polite but not close. It was a small thing. Most people never noticed it. But James noticed everything now. He had trained himself to. 3 days later, at a biogas plant 6 miles down the county road, a steel bracket cracked in half. The bracket held the mixing shaft inside an anaerobic digester, a large tank that turned farm waste into methane gas and fertilizer. The plant belonged to Northfield Renewables, a young clean energy company based in Bend, Oregon. The crack happened during startup testing in front of 2 investors and a county inspector. Julian Otero, the site manager, watched the shaft grind to a stop and felt his stomach drop the way it does on a fast elevator. He was younger than James by a decade, stocky and broad-shouldered, with an open, expressive face that showed every worry before he ever said it out loud. He had 3 weeks left before the plant needed to be fully operational, or Northfield would lose its state grant funding. "Get me someone who can tell me why this happened," Julian said to no one in particular. "Today, if we can." The trouble was, nobody in the county did that kind of work anymore. The nearest mechanical engineer with heavy equipment experience was 2 hours away in Portland, and his rate alone would eat a week of the project's remaining budget. That night, one of the crew mentioned, almost as a joke, that the quiet farmer up the road fixed his own tractor engine last spring in a way that looked like something out of a textbook. Julian found James kneeling in the dirt, adjusting a drip irrigation line, and stood at a respectful distance until James noticed him. "I hear you're good with machines," Julian said. James did not stand up right away. He kept his eyes on the irrigation fitting in his hands, turning it slowly, by himself a few seconds before he had to look up. "I grow vegetables," James said. "Sure, but somebody told me you rebuilt a diesel engine last year using parts from 3 different tractors. That's not exactly beginner work." James finally stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. Up close, Julian looked younger than James had expected, and more worried than he was trying to appear. "What do you need?" James asked, his voice careful, guarded, the tone of a man opening a door only wide enough to see who was standing on the other side. Julian explained the bracket, the sound it made when it let go, the way the shaft had ground to a stop mid-test in front of 2 investors and a county inspector. He described the fracture surface almost apologetically, the way a person describes a wound to a doctor they're not sure will agree to treat them. "Half of it looks smooth," Julian said. "Almost polished. The other half looked torn up. Rough." Something in James sharpened, despite himself. He knew exactly what that description meant, and for one unguarded second, a question nearly left his mouth. "What's your duty cycle on that shaft? How many startup and shutdown events since commissioning?" These were not farmer questions. He caught them before they escaped, the way a man catches a glass before it hits the floor, and something close to alarm crossed his face at how easily they had almost come out. "That's not the same as my problem," James said instead, his voice flatter now, pulling the door shut again. "I'm not asking you to sign anything," Julian said. "Just 15 minutes. Oh, look, I can't help you," James said. He said it the way he might state a soil pH reading, without heat, without apology. But Julian noticed the way James's hand had curled into a loose fist at his side, and the way his eyes had drifted, just briefly, toward the county road, as if measuring the distance between himself and anything that resembled his old life. "Okay," Julian said, because there was clearly no getting around it that day. "Thanks for your time." He turned to go, then stopped and added, almost to himself, 3 weeks and we lose the funding. 40 families in this valley were counting on cheaper power next year. But I get it. Not your circuit to fix. He walked back toward his truck without waiting for a response. And James stood alone in the row, the irrigation fitting forgotten in his hand. He told himself the tightness in his chest was irritation. It took him a long moment, standing there in the cooling afternoon light, to admit privately that it was something closer to grief. Claire, Donovan drove out to Hollis Creek 2 days later, after Julian told her the first approach had failed. Claire was 35, of average height, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a low, practical knot and quick brown eyes that seemed to price out a problem before anyone finished describing it. She ran Northfield Renewables the way she did most things, with speed and very little patience for wasted motion. But she also knew that speed sometimes worked against her, so when she stepped out of her truck, a blazer worn over a plain t-shirt and jeans, work boots already scuffed at the toe, and saw James standing at the edge of his field, arms crossed, she slowed herself down on purpose. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I know you already told Julian no. I'm not here to argue with that. I just wanted to explain the situation myself, in case it changes anything. You drove all the way out here to hear no the second time?" James asked. "I drove out here because Julian explains problems well and negotiates them badly," Claire said. "I like to be the one who explains what's actually at stake." Something flickered behind James's eyes, close to amusement, gone before it fully arrived. "And if the stakes don't change my answer? Then I've wasted an afternoon and half a tank of gas," Claire said. "Wouldn't be the first time." James studied her for a moment. Most people who wanted something from him talked fast, trying to fill the silence before he could refuse. Claire did not do that. She waited, comfortable enough in the quiet to let it sit between them. "You have 3 weeks," James said. It was not a question. Julian must have mentioned the deadline. 2 weeks and 4 days now, Claire said. "If we miss it, we lose our state funding, and that funding is the only reason 40 families in this valley are going to get affordable power and fertilizer next year. I'm not going to pretend that's your problem. It isn't. I'm just telling you what's at stake." James looked past her toward the hills, The way a man looks at something far away when he needs a second to think. One time, he said finally, "I'll look at the bracket once. I tell you what I see. After that, we're done." "That's fair," Claire said, and she meant it. She did not offer her hand to shake. Something told her he would not want that yet. She simply nodded and got back in her truck, and James stood there a long moment after she left, wondering why he had said yes. The bracket sat on a workbench in the digester building, split clean through at one edge, rough and grainy at the other. James recognized the pattern immediately. It was called fatigue failure. Metal did not usually break all at once. It cracked a little at a time, under repeated stress, until one day it simply gave up. The smooth part of the break was the old crack, growing quietly for weeks. The rough part was the final snap. This crack didn't start yesterday, James said, mostly to himself. It's been growing for a while. Julian and Claire stood a few feet back, letting him work. "Can you tell what caused it?" Claire asked. "Not yet. Could be a design problem. Could be bad material. I need the mill certificate for this steel and your bolt torque records." Claire glanced at Julian, who nodded and went to pull the paperwork. James did not say anything else, but something in his chest had shifted slightly. For the first time in 2 years, someone was asking him a technical question and waiting to hear the real answer, not a version they had already decided on. It felt for a few minutes almost like being himself again. The mill certificate came back a week later, and something about it bothered James right away. A mill certificate is a document that proves what a piece of steel is actually made of, its strength, its composition, its origin. This one listed a supplier James had never heard of, based out of a small logistics office in Nevada. The certification numbers have followed a pattern that looked almost right, but not quite. James had spent years reading these documents. He knew what almost right looked like. He kept the observation to himself for a few days. He was not ready to explain why the pattern felt so familiar. Julian, meanwhile, solved the more immediate problem the only way he could. He sourced a replacement bracket from a certified supplier within days, machined to the original specification, and backed by a mill certificate James checked personally twice before it went anywhere near the digester. Northfield hit its commissioning deadline with 2 days to spare, and the state funding came through without incident. For Julian, that should have been the end of the story. For James, it was only the beginning. On the 14th evening, Claire and James sat on the tailgate of her truck outside the digester building, going over the torque records by flashlight. "You read these numbers faster than anyone I've ever worked with," Claire said. "Where'd you learn that?" James was quiet for a moment. He expected the next question to be about his past, the one people always asked once they got curious. But Claire just waited, eyes on the paperwork, giving him the space to answer or not. Nobody had ever done that before. "I used to inspect fabrication work," James said slowly. "Pressure vessels, structural steel, that kind of thing. Big projects." "For who?" James hesitated. His hand rubbed the edge of the tailgate, back and forth, a small motion that helped him keep talking. "Doesn't matter anymore," he said, his voice dropping lower. "That part of my life is over." Claire did not push. She simply said, "Okay," and went back to the numbers. James felt something strange in his chest that night, a mixture of relief and fear, like a bolt that had been torqued too tight for years, finally allowed to loosen just slightly. The supply chain trail took time to follow. James spent evenings cross-checking supplier names, purchase orders, and shipping records that Julian pulled from the company files. On the 18th day, he found it. Meridian Sourcing Group, a shell company registered in Nevada that existed mostly on paper, supplying bolts and steel to small energy projects across 3 states. The company's registered agent was a name James had not seen in 2 years, a name he had spent 2 years trying not to think, the way a tongue avoids a broken tooth and finds it anyway. Gregory Pruitt. James went very still. The laptop screen blurred slightly, and for a moment the kitchen table under his hands did not feel like his kitchen table at all. It felt like the conference room at Ridgeline, windowless, the air conditioning too cold, 5 people across the table who would not look at him. His pulse picked up in his ears, a fast, uneven drumming, and his hands, when he looked down at them, had gone cold and faintly numb, the way they used to before he learned to stop shaking in front of people. He stood up too fast. The chair scraped hard against the floor behind him, and he did not remember standing until he was already 3 steps toward the door, breathing like he had been running. He made himself stop. He made himself put a hand flat on the counter, feel the cool laminate under his palm, count the tiles on the floor the way he used to count bolt patterns for a cross, until his heartbeat came back down to something ordinary. 2 years. He had built an entire life on the idea that this name would never surface again, that he had buried it under soil and irrigation lines and Saturday market crates. And it had taken one supplier record, one registered agent field, to prove how thin that burial had been. He could still picture Pruitt's face with unpleasant clarity, silver hair combed back, a soft-spoken warmth in meetings that never once reached his eyes. Pruitt had been the vice president of procurement at Ridgeline Mechanical Corp., the company where James had worked for 11 years, first as a junior inspector, later as the senior engineer whose sign-off other people's careers depended on. Ridgeline had fired him for taking bribes to approve substandard bolts on a structural project. James had never taken a single bribe in his life. But by the time the internal investigation ended, his signature was on the wrong documents, his approval codes on records he never remembered signing, and Pruitt's own name was nowhere to be found on any of it. Nobody in the industry had believed James back then. Why would they? The paperwork said what it said, and paperwork, in James's experience, was usually more convincing than a man's word. Julian did what any responsible project manager would do once a supplier's material had failed. On the 19th day, Northfield's procurement office issued a formal supplier nonconformance report against Meridian Sourcing Group, the standard first step before disputing an invoice or pursuing a warranty claim. It was routine paperwork, sent by certified mail and email alike, listing the fail bracket, the suspect certification numbers, and a request for the original mill test reports. Routine paperwork has a way of finding its way to people who do not want to be found. Within days, the notice reached Gregory Pruitt, whose name still sat quietly on the company's registration as its agent, buried under a dozen other small entities he managed the same way. He read it twice, the way a man reads a letter he has spent 2 years hoping never to receive, and he understood at once that this was not a simple supplier complaint. Someone was pulling a thread that led directly back to him. Pruitt did not call Northfield. He called Everett Halloran instead, a man he had sat on a board with for years at Cascade Intermodal Holdings, a logistics company 2 states away, and a man who also happened to be one of Northfield's earliest and largest investors. On the 21st night, the story came out in pieces, the way water finds its way through a small crack before the whole dam gives way. James sat across from Claire at his kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He stared at the mug instead of at her when he started talking. I worked at a company called Ridgeline Mechanical, James said, big industrial fabrication and engineering firm, out of Portland. I was in quality control, senior level, final sign-off on structural fabrication. His voice was flat, careful, like a man walking on ice he did not trust to hold him. 2 years ago, they said I took money to approve bolts that didn't meet spec. Corruption is the word they used in the termination letter. Bribery is the word everyone else used once it got out. Claire did not move. She kept her eyes on him, steady, waiting. "Did you do it?" she asked, gently. No accusation in it at all. Just a question laid flat on the table between them. "No." The word came out sharp, almost too loud for the small kitchen, as if some part of him had been waiting 2 years for someone to ask, so he could finally say it out loud. He caught himself, took a breath, and said it again, quieter, but no less certain. "No, I didn't take anything from anyone. I never signed off on a single part one didn't believe was good. I know what I approved. I know what I didn't." His jaw was tight, his knuckles pale around the mug. He looked up at her then, waiting for the flicker he had learned to expect, the small shift in a person's face when doubt crept in no matter what they said out loud. It did not come. Claire nodded slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was even, without pity, without the careful gentleness people use on someone they secretly do not believe. "Okay," she said. Just that. No further questions, no request for proof, no reassurance that sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. She picked her coffee back up and took a sip, as if he had told her nothing more remarkable than the day's weather. James stared at her, thrown slightly off balance by how little ceremony she had made of it. "That's it? Okay. What did you want me to say?" "I don't know," James admitted. "Something else. Something that sounds like you're still deciding." "I already decided," Claire said. "Weeks ago. Watching you read a fatigue crack like it was a sentence in a language you were born speaking. People who cut corners for money don't usually care that much about getting it right." Something in James's chest loosened, not all at once, but enough that he felt it, a small give in a place that had been clenched tight for 2 years. He said nothing for a moment because he did not trust his voice yet. Then, quietly, "Thank you." "Don't thank me for believing something that's true," Claire said. "That's not a favor. That's just paying attention." James's shoulders dropped half an inch, the first time in 2 years his body had allowed itself that much. On the 24th day, the call came. Everett Halloran phoned Claire directly, his voice pleasant but firm, the tone of a man delivering advice he expected to be taken. He had heard, he said, through industry channels, that Northfield was reopening an old fraud case connected to Ridgeline Mechanical, and he strongly suggested she let it go before it became anyone's problem. He did not mention a phone call from Gregory Pruitt. He did not need to. Claire already knew, by then, exactly how the two men were connected, and that loyalty in that world traveled sideways as easily as it traveled up. "Halloran's telling me to walk away," Claire told James the next evening, her arms crossed, her jaw tight in a way he had not seen before. "He's saying it's not worth the relationship." James felt something twist in his stomach, a familiar shape, the same fear that had kept him silent for 2 years. If he stayed quiet now, it would protect him the way silence always had. But it would not protect Claire. That night, under the porch light outside his farmhouse, James told her everything. They sat in the 2 porch chairs he never used, angled toward each other, close enough that their voices did not have to carry far. James held a mug of coffee he never drank. He turned it slowly in his hands while he talked, the same way he used to turn a fitting before deciding whether it was sound. "You want the real version," James said. It was not quite a question. "Only if you want to give it," Claire said. James nodded once, the way a man signs off on a decision he has already made. 11 years at Ridgeline. Last 3 as senior quality engineer. My signature was the last one on any structural fabrication package before it shipped. Mill certificates, weld inspection reports, bolt torque logs, all of it crossed my desk. If my name was on it, it meant I'd verified it myself, in person, against the paperwork. And 2 years ago, 2 years ago, we were finishing a pipe rack structure for a refinery expansion outside Longview. Big job, tight schedule. One of our bolt suppliers started shipping lots with mill certificates that didn't match the actual material. Wrong grade steel, stamped as high strength when it wasn't. If nobody caught it, that structure could have failed under load. People could have been hurt. Did you catch it? Eventually, I flagged 3 lots as non-conforming and rejected them. That should have been the end of it. James's jaw tightened. Except somebody went back into the system after I rejected them and changed the disposition to accepted. Used my login, my approval codes. Made it look like I signed off on bad steel twice, 3 weeks apart for a bribe nobody could ever find in my bank account because I never took one. Gregory Pruitt, Claire said quietly. He ran procurement. He had the access. He had the motive, I found out later. He was skimming a margin off that supplier and needed the bad lots to move without anyone asking questions. But when the internal audit found the discrepancy, it was my name in the system, not his. He made sure of that. Claire's expression had gone very still, the kind of stillness that comes from listening hard enough to forget your own face. What happened when they found it? Compliance called me into a conference room. No windows. 5 people on the other side of the table, legal, HR, my director, 2 people I'd never met. They showed me printouts with my approval codes on records I never touched. I told them to check the access logs, the timestamps, anything. They said the logs showed my credentials. End of discussion. His voice had gone flat again, the careful flatness of a man reciting something he had once screamed about, until screaming stopped working. They fired me that afternoon. 2 hours. 11 years gone in 2 hours. And nobody looked any further? Why would they? It was faster to close the file than reopen it. A fired engineer's word against a clean paper trail. My lawyer said we didn't have enough to win, not against a company with Ridgeline's legal budget, not with the system logs saying what they said. I ran out of money before I ran out of certainty. He looked at her then, straight on, the kind of look that cost him something to hold. That's the whole thing. I've spent 2 years being a name people say, quietly, if they say it at all. I moved out here because nobody at a farmer's market asks for your references. Claire was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, low, absolutely certain. I believe you, she said. Not because you sound convincing. Because none of this is the story a guilty man tells. A guilty man doesn't remember the lot numbers 2 years later. You do. James let out a breath he had been holding, it felt like, for 2 years. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Claire said. Thanking me is for after we fix it. James blinked. Fix it? Claire, it's been 2 years. The file's closed. Ridgeline has no reason to reopen it. Ridgeline has every reason. If the reason is standing in their supply chain right now, defrauding one of their business partners, Claire said. She sat forward, elbows on her knees, the negotiator's posture returning to her like a coat she had taken off for the evening and was now putting back on. I didn't build Northfield by waiting for someone else to fix my problems. I have a general counsel who used to prosecute corporate fraud for the state. I have a board with 3 former Ridgeline executives on it, people who left when the culture there started rotting. I have investors who care more about doing this right than protecting Gregory Pruitt's reputation, whatever Halloran thinks. You don't have to do this, James said. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the day a bracket cracked on my project because of the same man who ended your career, Claire said. This isn't charity, James. This is due diligence. I have every right to find out who's compromising my supply chain, and it happens to be the same man who compromised yours. James studied her, something working behind his eyes, disbelief slowly losing ground to something warmer. You're serious. I'm always serious. Occasionally also funny, but not about this. A small smile, then gone. Give me what you have. The shell company records, the supplier trail, everything you found. I'll bring my legal team. We do this properly, with real evidence, not just your word against a closed file. James looked down at the coffee mug in his hands, still full, still cold. When he looked back up, his voice was rougher than he meant it to be. Why does this matter so much to you? Claire considered the question longer than James expected. Because I've spent 6 years watching good engineers get overruled by people who are better at politics than they are at their jobs, she said. And because I like the man you are now, even after hearing what they turned you into on paper. I'd like to help you get your name back, so the world can catch up to what I already know. Neither of them said anything else for a while. The porch light hummed overhead, moths circling it in slow, patient loops, and for the first time in 2 years, James let a silence like that stretch out without needing to fill it or escape it. 3 days later, James called Delia Ruiz for the first time in 2 years. He almost hung up twice before she answered. When she did, there was a pause on the line, then her voice, careful, as if she was not sure it was really him. James! It's me. I heard you were farming, Delia said. I didn't know if I should believe that. I grow lettuce, James said. It's true. He explained everything in about 10 minutes. The cracked bracket, the shell company, Pruitt's name on the registration, the non-conformance notice, Claire's offer to help. Delia listened without interrupting, the same way she used to listen in design review meetings, taking in every detail before she said a word. I always thought something was wrong with that investigation, Delia said finally. The timeline never made sense to me. I just didn't have the standing to push back. I was 2 years into the job. You were the one with 11 years and a reputation, and even that wasn't enough to save you. Delia, James said, did you keep anything from back then? The pause this time was longer. James, I kept everything, Delia said. Every internal email Pruitt sent about supplier changes that quarter. Every version of the access log before someone cleaned it up. A signature comparison I ran myself, off the record, because the numbers on your disposition forms didn't look like your handwriting to me, and I've seen your handwriting on 100 inspection sheets. I never sent any of it anywhere, because I didn't think anyone would listen to a junior engineer accusing a vice president of fraud. I just couldn't make myself delete it. James sat down slowly at his kitchen table, one hand pressed flat against the wood, steadying himself the way he had learned to. You've had this for 2 years. I've had this for 2 years, hoping someday someone would ask, Delia said. Nobody ever did, until you just did. 2 days later, Claire drove out to Hollis Creek with her laptop and a video call already dialed in. Delia's face appeared on the screen, a woman with dark, quick eyes and the guarded posture of someone used to being the only person in a room who noticed the details nobody else did. Delia, this is Claire Donovan, James said. She runs Northfield Renewables. She's the one who got us this far. James told me a little about you, Delia said. He undersold you. He does that. He undersold the lettuce operation too, Claire said. I've seen the lettuce. It's very good lettuce. Something in James's chest loosened at the sound of the two women testing each other, easy and unafraid, the exact opposite of every conversation he'd had about his past for 2 years. Send me what you have, Claire said. All business again. Everything. My legal team will need to authenticate it, chain of custody, all of that. But if what James described is even half of what you're describing, we have enough to force Ridgeline's hand. I've been waiting 2 years to send this to someone who'd actually use it, Delia said. Give me until tomorrow. She was as good as her word. The next 2 weeks folded into a rhythm James had almost forgotten his body could hold. Early mornings on the farm, long evenings around his kitchen table buried in printed documents, a rotating cast of people who, for the first time in 2 years, were not asking him to explain himself, only to help them understand what had happened. Claire brought her general counsel, a sharp, soft-spoken woman named Priya Anand who had spent 8 years prosecuting corporate fraud before going in-house. And Priya brought a paralegal. And between them, a kitchen table that used to hold nothing but a coffee mug and a notebook now held color-coded folders, a whiteboard borrowed from Northfield's side office, and a timeline taped along one wall that grew a little longer every night. Delia's documents anchored all of it. Her signature comparison, the internal emails where Pruitt pushed the compliance team to close the investigation quickly, the shipping records that lined up, lot for lot, with the fraudulent supplier James had traced from the bracket failure back 2 years to the pipe rack job in Longview. Priya's team cross-referenced everything against Ridgeline's own retention policies, building a case not just that James was innocent, but that the company's own investigation had been sloppy enough to miss evidence sitting in its own servers. Claire and James fell into their own rhythm within the larger one, a shorthand that grew without either of them naming it. She learned to bring 2 coffees instead of one, his black, because she had noticed, without asking, that he drank it black. He learned the sound of her truck on the gravel road well enough to know it was her before she reached the porch. Once close to 1 in the morning, both of them too tired to keep reading, they sat on the porch steps in silence, watching the last of the kitchen lights spill out across the dark yard, and Claire leaned her shoulder against his, just barely, just enough. "You don't have to do that," James said quietly, meaning move away, meaning warn her off, meaning something he did not have the words for yet. "I know," Claire said. She didn't move. Neither did he. They did not talk about what was growing between them, not directly, not yet. There was too much else in front of them that needed saying first. But it sat there anyway, patient, the way a load sits on a beam long before anyone calculates whether the beam can hold it. And some nights, working late over documents that were slowly rebuilding his name, James thought that this, whatever it was, might be the one calculation he did not need to run twice to trust. On the 45th day, Ridgeline Mechanical Corp's Audit Committee convened an emergency session at its Portland headquarters. Priya had arranged it in under a week, using a combination of formal legal notice and a phone call to a board member she had once worked alongside at the State Attorney General's office. The subject line on the meeting request had been almost clinical: material nonconformance and historical personnel matter, Ridgeline Docket QA 0391. The contents were anything but. James had not set foot in a conference room in 2 years. He wore a jacket Claire had insisted he borrow, and though his hands did not shake, he kept them folded on the table in front of him, the same posture he had held 2 years ago on the other side of a very similar room, in a different building, with a very different outcome. Claire sat on his left. Delia, who had flown up that morning, sat on his right. Priya stood at the head of the table, a laptop connected to the screen behind her. 7 board members sat across from them. And at the far end of the table, arriving 4 minutes late, unbuttoning his jacket as he sat, was Gregory Pruitt. He had aged since the photograph James remembered, silver hair a little thinner, but the same unhurried, untroubled way of settling into a chair, a man who had never once in his life expected to be the one asked to explain himself. "Mr. Pruitt," the committee chair said, "thank you for making time. We understand you're here representing Meridian Sourcing Group as its registered agent, in connection with the nonconformance claim filed by Northfield Renewables. Happy to clear up whatever confusion there is," Pruitt said easily, glancing once at James, then away, as if James were a piece of furniture that had been rearranged without his permission. "Though I have to say, I'm surprised to see a personnel matter from 2 years ago dragged into a supplier dispute." "They're the same matter," Priya said. "That's what we're here to show you." She walked the room, through it methodically, the way James might walk a client through a stress analysis, one load case at a time. The fraudulent mill certificates on the digester bracket. The shell company registration linking Meridian sourcing to Pruitt personally. The identical fraud pattern on the Longview pipe rack job 2 years earlier. The access logs Delia had preserved showing James's approval codes used at a terminal in the procurement office, not quality control, at a time when James's badge records placed him in a different building entirely. That's a clerical inconsistency, Pruitt said, when Priya reached the badge records. A systems glitch. Nothing more. It's not a glitch, Delia said. It was the first time she had spoken, and her voice, though quiet, did not waver. I ran that comparison myself, 2 years ago, off the record, because I didn't trust what I was seeing. James's signature on the physical disposition forms doesn't match his signature anywhere else in his personnel file for that entire quarter. But it matches a signature sample from a training document you signed the same month, Mr. Pruitt. The forgery wasn't even careful. Nobody just checked. The room went very still. That's a serious accusation, one of the board members said slowly, looking at Pruitt now instead of James. It's a serious accusation because it's true, James said. It was the first time he had spoken since introductions, and his voice, when it came, was steadier than he expected it to be. I rejected 3 lots of substandard bolts on the Longview job. I have my own field notes from that week, time-stamped, showing the rejection. Somebody went into the system after I rejected them and changed my decision. I didn't get the chance to defend myself back then because nobody looked past the paperwork. I'm asking you to look past it now. Pruitt's easy composure had started, very slightly, to crack, a tightness around his eyes that had not been there 5 minutes earlier. This is a coordinated attack, he said, his voice rising for the first time. A disgruntled former employee, a competitor CEO with an axe to grind, and a junior engineer who's been sitting on stolen documents for 2 years. I'd think very carefully before this board takes any of that seriously. The documents aren't stolen, Delia said. They're mine. I made copies of my own work product, which I was entitled to do because I didn't trust the investigation you were running at the time. And I wasn't wrong not to trust it. Mr. Pruitt, the committee chair said, and something in his tone had changed completely, gone cold and formal in a way that made Pruitt sit up straighter. Can you explain why your registered agent information appears on a shell company that supplied fraudulent certifications to at least 2 projects, one of which nearly caused a serious structural failure at a biogas facility 3 weeks ago? I manage several small entities, Pruitt said. I can't personally verify every certification that passes through them. You can't, or you didn't want to, Claire said. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him, and her voice was even, unhurried, the same voice she used when she already knew she had won a negotiation and was simply waiting for the other side to notice. Because from where I'm sitting, Mr. Pruitt, it looks like you built a very convenient supply chain that let you skim a margin for years, and when one honest engineer caught it, you erased him instead of the fraud. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Pruitt looked around the table, searching for an ally, and found none. The board members who had known him for years were looking at him, now, the way people look at a beam they have just been told is cracked, with the specific, careful attention of people recalculating everything they had assumed was solid. The committee chair closed his folder. Mr. Pruitt, we'll need you to remain available for further questions, he said. This committee is going to recommend a full reinvestigation of the Longview termination, effective immediately, and I expect, given what we've just seen, that recommendation will not be difficult to pass. He turned to James, and something in his face, hard and official a moment ago, softened into something closer to shame. Mr. Whitmore, on behalf of this board, I want to apologize. What happened to you was a failure of this company, not just one man's greed. We should have looked harder 2 years ago. We didn't. That's on us. James did not trust his voice for a moment. He nodded instead, once the same small, exact motion he used to give a completed inspection. Apology accepted, he said finally. I'd also like it in writing. And I'd like it public. A faint, surprised sound came from somewhere near Claire. Not quite a laugh, quickly swallowed. That can be arranged, the chair said. Within a week, Ridgeline issued a public statement, carried by 3 regional business journals and the same trade press that had once printed Pruitt's version of events without question. It named James Whitmore directly, confirmed the fraud had been committed by former Vice President of Procurement Gregory Pruitt, and formally cleared James of all wrongdoing. The company also confirmed it had referred its findings to state prosecutors, who would pursue the matter separately. James read the statement, standing in his own kitchen, the same table where he had once turned a coffee mug slowly in his hands, unable to say much of anything at all. Claire read it over his shoulder, close enough that he could feel her breathing change when she reached his name in print, cleared in black and white, for anyone in the industry to see. How do you feel? She asked. James thought about it honestly before answering, the way he thought about anything that mattered. Lighter, he said, like I've been carrying a preload I didn't know I could set down. That night, for the first time in 2 years, he slept straight through until morning without waking once. 4 months later, the offer came through exactly as James expected. His old position back, full back pay for the 2 years he had lost, a formal letter signed personally by Ridgeline's new Vice President of Quality, the very department that had once signed his termination letter. James turned it down. He kept the lease on his 12 acres in Hollis Creek Valley. He still grew lettuce and squash and sold them at the Saturday market. But now, once or twice a month, he consulted on structural inspection projects for small companies across the state, choosing only the ones that interested him, on his own schedule, at his own rate. Claire drove out to the farm on a Sunday afternoon in late autumn, when the leaves along the ridge had turned the color of rust. You know, Claire said, arms crossed, fighting back a smile, I dated a hedge fund analyst once. Guy couldn't tell a tomato plant from a weed. That's not an engineering problem, James said, not looking up from the crate of squash he was stacking. That's a personality problem. And you? Could you tell a balance sheet from a spreadsheet before I dragged you into all this? I could spot a fatigue crack from 50 paces, James said. Your balance sheet, I still can't read. I just nod and assume it's bad news. You know, for a man who spent 2 years talking exclusively to vegetables, you've gotten mouthy, Claire said. Vegetables are good listeners. They don't show up in a blazer asking for free consulting. That blazer got your name back. I'd say it earned its keep. Never said I wasn't grateful. Said it was intimidating. Different thing entirely. Claire raised an eyebrow, arms still crossed, clearly enjoying herself. You? Intimidated? By a blazer. By what was in it? James said, and then looked briefly like he regretted saying it out loud, which only made her grin wider. Careful, Whitmore. Keep talking like that, and I'm going to start thinking you like me. You let your general counsel run cross-examinations at my kitchen table for 2 weeks straight. A man's allowed a little fear. You didn't seem scared. You seemed like you were enjoying the company. She tilted her head, especially the company that kept bringing you coffee. The coffee was good. I'm not going to lie about the coffee. Just the coffee. James considered the crate of squash like it might offer him an escape route. It did not. The coffee was excellent, he said. Everything that came with it wasn't bad either. Claire laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. I'm an engineer. We don't do romantic. We do accurate. It's usually not bad news anymore, Claire said, quieter now. James straightened up and looked at her, the same long, careful look he used to give a number before he trusted it. "No," he said. "I don't think it is." He set the crate down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stepped closer, close enough that neither of them was pretending anymore that this was only about squash or spreadsheets. "I've been running the same calculation for a while now," James said, "checking it twice, the way I check everything. Every time, I get the same answer." "What's the answer?" Claire asked, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. James did not say the word. It sat in his chest, plain and load-bearing, the kind of thing he had learned the hard way not to state out loud until he had checked it enough times to trust it completely. He had checked enough times now that some things don't need a factor of safety, he said instead. They just hold. Claire's smile broke open fully, the kind that reached her eyes. She did not ask him to say it more plainly. She understood exactly what he meant, the way she had understood him from the very first afternoon she refused to fill his silences. She reached for his hand, the way he had once reached for hers without being asked, and this time neither of them let go.